Let's take a break right here and allow you to finish that thought on the other side of the break. Dr. Allan Carlson is our guest. We're talking about family-centered economies. He's president of the Howard Center for Family, Religion, and Society based in Rockford, Illinois. International Secretary for the World Congress of Families, author of several books, including his latest called Third Ways, How Bulgarian Greens, Swedish Housewives, and Beer-Swilling Englishmen Created Family-Centered Economies and Why They Disappeared. I guess the big question before we conclude with him is it possible to actually do this? Were all these attempts well-intended but ultimately destined to fail? We'll be right back.
Where Christianity meets culture. You're listening to Issues, Etc.
Welcome back to Issues, Etc. In the middle of a very interesting conversation with Dr. Allan Carlson about a family-centered economy. Before the break, Dr. Carlson, Scott was on the line. I want you to be able to finish your thought. He asked the question about the need for business to be able to measure its impact on the family. Scott was saying he doesn't see any mechanism for doing that in his context. Your final thought there.
Well, again, just the one point I made is we don't have an accounting mechanism in place to bring that into the books in any way, shape, or form. It's seen most glaringly in what economists now call human capital, which in the long run is what any economy that has a future needs. And investment in human capital means the birth of babies. It means their best possible rearing so that they grow up to be healthy, happy, productive, bright, enterprising citizens. That's the most important kind of capital that any society has. But we don't count it at all. It's not included, again, in any accounting schemes. Corporations are not held to account for their investment in human capital. In fact, they just assume that investment will come from private families or from someplace, or more likely, they'll just, when they've worn out the human capital in one place, like, say, a Rust Belt town in the Midwest, they'll move the factory to Mexico and kind of exhaust the human capital there, and then they'll take it over to China. Again, the incentives they face place no barriers to that, and I mean it's rational economic behavior, but it doesn't. But the sort of the abandoned folks back home, to them, it's a different story.
JW's up next, calling from his car. Hi, JW.
Hi, Pastor. Hi, Doctor. I'm extremely happy to hear you guys talking about Chesterton. I teach philosophy, and I try to bring him up when we talk about Thomas Aquinas, because I know Chesterton was not only a biographer of Aquinas, but quite a fan. And the question I'd like to hear addressed that I've not heard in a lot of books is Chesterton's views on pluralism, because I know Thomas Aquinas and the whole Christian medieval tradition back to the ancient Greeks would have held it as crazy that you could have a pluralistic society in which, you know, the most fundamental metaphysical questions guiding people's choices could be completely at odds with one another, and yet people could be considered a society when one person has the dollar bills in their eyes and another person is looking toward the cross. I'm just wondering if you could, I know that T.S. Eliot in After Strange Gods touched on this question as well. I'm just wondering if you could address that, and I'd be curious to hear what you have to say, and thanks a lot.
JW, thank you very much. Were the distributionists pluralists too?
Generally, yes. I mean, they were a remarkably broad-minded and open people. They believed in a community of nations. They were patriots without being nationalists. They were, I think, very generous, and their form of, I guess you'd say, of pluralism was to make sure that all, as far as they could possibly do so through public policy and through culture, to make sure that all families would have access to property and to the independence that delivered property. And Chesterton himself actually was a convert to Catholicism, and became a huge enthusiast for Catholicism, maybe its greatest apologist in the 20th century. But he also recognized that not everybody was Catholic, certainly not in his home native home of England. So I think he was just about everything I know about Chesterton is just he was admirable. He was an early and energetic foe against eugenics. He was a foe against imperialism. He regularly denounced the British adventure in South Africa called the Boer War, which was open imperialism. Really was believed thought Britain should get out of the colonial business and free people. He was just about every aspect that I know about him. He was just a genuine, fine fellow.